Okay. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third installment of I Pray With My Feet Civil Rights Series. We're having a little bit of a delay with some technology, but we will get that together. I want to introduce myself. My name is Dee Sanae, and I'm the founder and executive director of Mosaic Visions. We are bringing this event to you this evening. For those of you who are joining us for the first time and don't know about Mosaic Visions, we are a diverse nonprofit organization that continues active conversations within the Jewish community through discussions of intersectionality and multiculturalism within an identity framework. Our reach is international as well as cross-generational. This organization is representative of different Jewish communities, re-examining what it is truly to be Jewish instead of saying one is, to encompass the spirit of Jewish values and incorporate that into action as we pursue healing and being the example to others. Last week for part 2, we discussed more about the Freedom Summer and what was exactly Black empowerment. We spoke about how other movements felt empowered to also come out, such as the women's liberation movement, the LGBTQ, Chicano Latino movement, and the labor movement in 1963, and so much more. The topic that came to the forefront from last year and rings true today is how to be a true ally for each other. This evening, we will be speaking about the result and the aftermath of after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., the positives and the challenges of the civil rights movement, and what work we have to do to correct for the future generations. We will tie this discussion into the larger social issues of diverse society, inclusion, racial equity, and social action between the Jewish communities and beyond, seeking allyships between the Jewish people and other historically neglected communities of Black, Indigenous persons of color. I will also be facilitating this series alongside Ms. Yolanda Savage-Narva, the Director of Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the Union of Reformed Judaism. Hello, good evening, Yolanda. Thanks for joining us again for the third installment.
Dee, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I am really excited about this third installment. As if the first two weren't phenomenal, I suspect that this one will really draw people in, and you'll want to hear more. So I do want to just say that I'm Yolanda Savage-Narva. I use she, her pronouns, and I want to pause and give a land acknowledgement today just to help ground us in this space and to also recognize that there were people most places before we were ever here. And so that land acknowledgement for me is in Washington, D.C., where the Pamunkey, the Piscataway, and the Anacostan tribal communities once lived. And if you'd like to understand and learn more about communities, indigenous communities where you are, there's an app called Native Lands. I will actually put it in the chat if you'd like to check that out as well. And so you're in for a treat today. I will stop talking and I will turn it back over to Dee.
Thank you, Yolanda, for that land acknowledgement and introduction. We are joining two panelists and speakers that have been here throughout the month of Elul, which is Lou Zuchman and Larry Rubin. We also have a special guest, Luvaghn Brown. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Firstly, Lou Zuchman is an original 1961 freedom rider. The Freedom Rides are considered by historians a critical opening chapter in America's civil rights movement. Mr. Zuchman was incarcerated for 40 days in Mississippi's notorious Parchman State Penitentiary for his breach of peace violation. Lou has continued his civil rights activism and incarceration through activism, including the following: chairperson of Bridgeport Congress of Racial Equity, otherwise known as CORE, participant in Mississippi voter registration and Southern sit-in movement, participant in the Meredith March Against Fear in Mississippi. His civil rights activism has been documented in numerous books and documentaries, including magazines and newspapers. He has worked in East Harlem and South Bronx communities for the past 50 years, and he still serves as the executive director of Scan Harbor, formerly known as Scan New York. Next we have Mr. Larry Rubin. He's an officer of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee Legacy Project, which works with young activists across the country to share the lessons of the civil rights movement. He was one of the few white full-time SNCC organizers in Southwest Georgia and Mississippi, supporting Black Southerners risking their lives to register to vote. He helped organize the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party that worked with tenant farmers to ensure that they could exercise their rights, and helped organize a union of Black and white workers. For 45 years, he has been committed to the civil rights movement and justice. And he is also was also a reporter for the Dayton Daily News, a speechwriter for the U.S. Department of Education, and he served 4 terms on the Tacoma Park Council. Lastly, we have a special guest. His name is Mr. Luvaghn Brown. He's a native of Jackson, Mississippi, and he's also a 1961 Freedom Ride. His active involvement in the civil rights movement was by being arrested for sitting at a whites-only lunch counter at the local Woolworth. He was later arrested for, among other things, sitting on the white side of a courtroom. He became the field secretary for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he has worked primarily in Greenwood and Jackson, Mississippi, and direct action in voter registration. He moved to Chicago, Illinois, where he worked with the Friends of SNCC on demonstrations, local politics, preparation for the March on Washington, and fundraising. Then he moved to New York, worked with SNCC there, and became involved with the New York Core Group. He remains involved in community and social justice activities. And we are very honored to have all 3 in this last installment, which would be talking about the post-assassination and Black-Jewish relations and the present, and how does that look like. So starting out the evening, thank you to Larry and Lou for joining us again. We hope to have Mr. Brown joining us soon. So I wanted to start off with the post-assassination. And after we spoke about everything up until Black empowerment in the last panel, before the assassination of Martin Luther King, he started speaking about economic empowerment among Blacks. What impact do you think that had after the assassination of Martin Luther King, since he was saying these things alongside Malcolm X? These are these words that were starting to be told to the public. And Larry and Lou, you can answer at any time.
Lou, why don't you take it first, and I'll join in.
I'm gonna let you do it, Larry. But could you? I'm sorry, Dee. Could you repeat that? I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
So I was saying, we were talking before the assassination of Martin Luther King. His message was about economic empowerment among Blacks, and creating, wealth among the communities. And so I'm asking, after his assassination and the assassination of Malcolm X, because those messages were ringing true from both of them, what impact do you think that had to the Black community and to other communities surrounding that?
Okay. First of all, I disagree that that's what Dr. King was talking about before he was assassinated. I think to the contrary. Dr. King dramatically moved away from just civil rights in terms of the African American community and spoke much more powerfully and meaningfully about America being, say, two nations. I remember one of the last speeches he gave before he was murdered in San Francisco. He talked about America being this vast ocean of prosperity with these islands of profound poverty. He spoke against the war. He was criticized for that. people felt he should have stayed just on civil rights. He had the courage, I think, not to do that and move beyond that. So I think that's really important. He certainly talked about the need for African American economic empowerment, but he talked about the need for economic empowerment for whites in Appalachia, for Native Americans, etc. So I think it's critical to be aware of that, and I think, you know, sometimes we wonder why he was killed at that point in his life, why Malcolm was killed at a point he moved from a solely African American perspective to a more a broader perspective. And so what happened after that was, I think, a tragedy. We lost a really very special human being who did what I don't feel he's given credit for this. His embrace of Bayard Rustin, his moving beyond just the limited vantage of civil rights for just African Americans, understanding that this is a national struggle of all of us, and that if we do not recognize that and address that, we're going to lose. And I feel that and I feel that's really important. I think it's an important issue that I still feel we don't address as well as we need to. So Larry, why don't you follow up?
Well, I think when Martin Luther King was killed, a good part of the Black community was saying to itself, look, here's a leader that says America should be truly integrated, that the nation should become equal. And then they killed him, they being white people. So a lot of Black people said to themselves, you know, there's just nobody out there to work with. America will never allow us to become part of the nation on an equal basis. And then you had Malcolm X talking about, as Black people, we need to build our own infrastructure. We need to build our own wealth. This was the message of Elijah Muhammad, he said. And then he got killed. And I think most people saw it as some kind of internal thing within the Nation of Islam. And so Black people said to themselves, well, here's one guy talking about integration, they killed him. Here's another guy talking about building self-empowerment. And some kind of way within that movement, he got killed. And I think what was left, because the notion of Black power and Black empowerment was very deep by this time, was left was just confusion and rage, just rage, because empowerment was, the idea of empowerment was there, but it wasn't clear how to express this. So what we were left with was just rage. And I think, you know, that's what led to the revolts in the various communities where they burned businesses, particularly white businesses. It was just chaos, because with rage and no program and no direction, you get chaos. That's my answer to the question.
You know, and I know we want to hear from our guests, but it's interesting that if you step back and look at places where these phenomenal leaders started to pivot and see the world in a very different way, that's when they were the biggest threat. That's when they were the biggest threat to actually bringing people together based on, you know, a common struggle, a common pain, and And if you look at this throughout other movements as well, that's exactly what happened to a lot of the leaders who were starting to say, hey, you know what, this is about the people, and the people is everyone who's impacted by poverty and inequity. And it's just astounding to understand it in that way. I don't know, what you all think about that, but that's a pattern that we've seen over and over.
I 100%. I mean, Malcolm X, even although he was talking about Black self-empowerment and building resources within the Black community, he was saying we have to be part of America and we have allies, and it is to the benefit of everybody if Black people do this.
Luvaghn, why don't you jump in?
Now, I was just listening to this because I know when Martin Luther King got killed, when he started talking about poor people, which meant everybody, and I know that Malcolm was killed after he came back from Mecca and said we had it wrong. We need to talk about everybody. We know that anybody in this country who has taken the position, or any leader that has taken the position that people need to work together and that the problems that affect Black people affect everybody, when they've taken that position, they've been killed. And, you know, we're at that precipice again where we need to start looking at, you know, one of the things that happens when I go out now, when I talk to people, or I talk to kids mainly, is that I no longer talk about a Black problem in America. And I think it's a mistake to do that. And it's a mistake because it's not just a problem that Black people have, it's an American problem. And we do it from the Black perspective when we talk about it. But it's America's problem. And I think that Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and even Bobby Kennedy, everybody that talked about people getting together got killed, and we just need to go around that this time around.
Yes.
I don't know how we do that. The best example I've seen of it was the marches that took place after George Floyd was killed, when you saw all over the world people of multi-race, multicolored, marching together, and all we have to do is come up with what's next.
If I could jump in, just as an example of that, in Mississippi, in Holly Springs, where the town that I worked with, when mostly young people marched to protest George Floyd's killing, the white businesses sent, first of all, sent people. They took part in these marches too. And they sent food to the marchers and messages of support. You had police chiefs all over Mississippi saying this would never happen here. You know, we would simply not allow it. And I think this is just an example of what you're saying. And it's an example in the most racist place in the country where people came together.
You know, I think it's important to underscore this. You know, Yolanda, I thought, put it very powerfully. When we come together, those folks that are the people that we're trying to either educate or overcome, but very threatened. And this coming together is something that I feel is part of why we're having these three sessions. I graduated. I went to City College. I graduated in '67. That's not the point. In 1949, City College, with a team of 10 Jews and 4 African Americans, won the NIT and NCAA championship. The only college in the history of American basketball to win both titles. A team solely composed of Jews and African Americans, at a point where there were almost no African Americans playing basketball in college and none in the NBA. The next year, they arrested almost the whole team for supposedly shaving points in a gambling scandal. There's a wonderful book written by Matthew Goldman pointing out the hypocrisy and racism of what was done to these young men. Every one of them returned to city, graduated. Erwin Dambrot became a dentist. Joe Gallagher was the first African-American elected to office in the Bronx County. Floyd Lane became a principal. We want to go back further. The NAACP was founded by William Walling, a Jewish American, Anna Strunsky, his wife, and W.B. Du Bois. And moving forward to the Georgia senatorial race, if it wasn't for an African American and a Jew coming together in Georgia, Donald Trump would be president. So when we come together, very powerful things happen. And we don't, I don't think we focused and emphasized that and work assiduously for that. So I think we need to learn from the positives. I mean, you know, the last 2 weeks we talked about some of the things that were wrong, but what about what was right? You know, when I mentioned the City College, because I am a City College graduate and I played basketball at City about 15 years after this happened. And I've always been upset that City didn't celebrate this more. It wasn't about these young men being arrested. That's baloney. It's about these young men coming together and doing something really dramatic. We beat the University of Kentucky, who refused to shake our hands. A team that came out with silk uniforms, looking like $1 million. And the City College guys came out in uniforms that were frayed. And we beat their behinds.
I assume you had a point there, Lou.
That is a point, Mr. B.
Okay.
When we come together, we can win. That's the point.
There are many things that get in the way of people coming together. A lot of it has to do with, we live in a society that in order to move ahead, we have to be separate and apart. That's how the system is rigged. And we are kept busy fighting one problem after another. And people who are, you know, let me put it this way, we either create, we meaning the black people, we create an opportunity for black people and white people to take advantage of us, as opposed to creating an opportunity for us to move ahead. And if you look around you, you'll see that people haven't recognized yet. And you will hear it in the black community about, I'm going to vote for so-and-so because they're black. And that might be the very person that you should not be voting for, but that's how we're trained. Or I'm not going to vote for so-and-so because he's white. And that may be the very person that we should be voting for. And I don't think we stop and allow ourselves to think beyond what's put in front of us. And I think that's part of the problem. The other thing I think is that people themselves want to survive. And I think we saw a lot of that during the height of the civil rights era when in Mississippi, I was speaking at a synagogue once, and they asked, well, what did you think of Jewish people in Mississippi? Well, I didn't know any. All I knew was white people. And I know that the Jewish people who were in Mississippi, I found out later, were white, but they had to survive. In order for them to survive, the same people that we were trying to survive, they had to be quiet. And that still goes on today. When I came to New York, I had the same problem. So I think we have to forego color and race and look at what the problem is, and then we can move. There was no reason for me not to know that there was a difference, well, except I was 16 years old, but that there was a difference between the Jewish people in Mississippi and the rest of the white people in Mississippi. There was a difference, but they couldn't come out from hiding because they would be killed. That's no longer the case, but our society is built so that everybody depends on getting ahead, and you get ahead by being white.
It's an interesting point that you've made. Do you feel that that has caused the tension between the communities by saying, "Oh, you didn't speak up for me. You didn't speak up for me then," in terms of anti-Semitism and anti-Blackness? Is it because that we're still trying, or these communities are still trying to survive, or they don't want to be attacked, or they don't feel like the other community is supporting them? How do you feel about that right now in the present? Because
Well,
I see some of the same things that you're illustrating that happened back then.
I think what happens is everybody treats one person as every person. For instance, I know that there are a lot of people in New York, Jewish people, who want to be white, who are racist, who are a lot of things. I know that there are black people who will take advantage of me because I'm lower on the totem pole. And I think that we have to, I mean, I have a lot of friends who are from both sides of the track, and some of them just don't trust people, particularly in the South, you'll find this. Because even today, there's a lot that goes on that is negative when it comes to black and white problems. There's a lot that goes on that's positive in New York, in California, but not in the rest of America. The population that is white is busy being white or picked on, and that's just a fact. And I think that we have to embrace their problems. We, as black people, need to embrace the problems that Jewish people have in this country, and they have to embrace the problem that we as black people have. The problem is it may cost them more than it will cost us because we're at the bottom. Black people are at the bottom. Jewish people don't realize that they're being used in some cases. They're being taken advantage of in a lot of cases. So I think that this dialogue, for instance, I think is wonderful. And I know that I've talked to people over the years. He was one of the people that was a big part of the civil rights movement. And to this day, he fights for the rights of black people. But I didn't know half of the things that had happened to him until he told me. And then but I know that I have people in Mississippi who do things against Jewish people because that's the way they come up. So it's the same as talking to poor whites. We have to have the dialogue before anything else will change.
I just got back from Mississippi. I was in Holly Springs all last week, and I heard something that I've heard all my life from somebody that is a public intellectual, actually. He thought he was praising me. He said, well, when you came here to Holly Springs 50 years ago, you were the only white person in the community that was fighting for blacks. And so you must have caught a lot of hell from the white community. But it wasn't like that. I mean, I did not grow up in Philadelphia, in the slums of Philadelphia, thinking that I was white. It just never came up. I did not think of myself as white. If anything, I thought of myself as Jewish, I suppose. And then there was the Polish, the Irish, the blacks, the Italians. They were all different types of goyim. I mean, I didn't distinguish really. And when I went south, I used to joke with people. I said, black, white, I can't understand anything anybody is saying, black or white.
Right.
But I was never able to break through to really anybody that I met in Mississippi about that I was Jewish. At Southwest, as a matter of fact, John O'Neill wrote up a story about me and Mama Dolly, who was a woman that we lived with in Southwest Georgia. John and I were both organizers, and we lived with Mama Dolly. It was a very funny story, and it was me trying to tell Mama Dolly that I wasn't white, that I was Jewish, and she didn't get it. And the truth is, nobody got it. I was just white, and if the idea of a Jewish person as a different kind of white got through it all, I heard a lot. Well, if I go into the Gentile-owned dress shop, they won't let me try on dresses, but at the Jewish-owned dress shop, they let me try on dresses. Which wasn't much of a difference. I never ran into anti-Semitism among blacks in my entire time in Southwest Georgia, Mississippi. I did among whites. In Belzoni, Mississippi, I got arrested, and the sheriff and his deputies surrounded me and said, "We haven't hung us a heeb in a long time. So you're next." They threatened me they're going to take me out and hang me. And as a matter of fact, based upon that, I decided if I ever got out of there alive and got back to college, I was going to study Eastern European Jewish history to try to determine what it was about me that these white people hated. So why was I like I was? And I did. That was my major, is Eastern European Jewish history. And I did learn. I came from a long line of people whose life, no matter what they did, one was a baker, for example, was based on fighting for justice for themselves, but with the sure knowledge that they couldn't get justice for themselves if they didn't join with other people. This was in Eastern Europe. And so joining with the struggle for blacks in this country was sort of natural. I mean, it wasn't even thought about. But that kind of Jewish person was simply, that category didn't exist in the minds of Mississippians, black or white.
But I think it's an important point to make, that we were considered black when we first came to this country.
Yes.
And I know when I have to fill out the census forms and stuff, I do not mark off that I'm white. So I guess our identity as Jewish folk in this country has been, to some extent, that we were seen as black, if you will, that we were dramatically discriminated against because of who we were. And of course, that's part of our identification with African Americans and all oppressed people. And I know when I grew up, I remember my first job was in the garment district at Reisman and Rothman, which was a Jewish firm. And so the young people who worked in the summer, we were all Jewish because we knew the bosses and they gave us work. Everyone else who was there, ticketing coats, putting them on racks, pushing the racks through the garment district, were African American and Puerto Rican. And I remember my first week there, each time we would have lunch, the black and Latino workers would be sitting at tables, and the Jewish guys all went off into their own table. And that really bothered me. So I sat with the African Americans, Latinos. That doesn't make me a star, incidentally, but I did. I just felt that's where I wanted to be. So for many of us, this was a natural piece, but I think that it was natural as Larry and I mentioned, I guess the first week, it's part of our DNA. I mean, this is, I think, lives inside us, not only through the memories of our grandparents and great-grandparents and our parents. But I think also it just is, it really is inside us. And there is an affinity for oppressed folk, which I think is something we should be proud of and nurture and celebrate. I hope that's how the show ends, if you will.
Yes. I have to say, when I was drafted, they gave out a form that you're supposed to mark your race. This is in the draft in Philadelphia. And I wrote in human. And the sergeant or whoever was running the process came up to me, you know, what do you want that for? I said, oh, we want, you know, we just want to know if you get killed so we can help identify you. I said, well, if I get killed, what do I care if you can identify me? That's your problem. I just put a human. That's how I felt.
Yeah. You know, this is interesting. It's making me think more about this idea around intersectionality. You know, I have a couple of friends who say, stop using that word. What does intersectionality mean? And it really means that people have multiple identities, right? I mean, I think today, you know, Dee and I are both Jewish Black women, you know, with multiple other identities that are included in that. And I think when you really start taking a step back and seeing how interconnected people are, that, you know, these conversations hopefully will spark something in folks to understand that although we have multiple issues that impact all of our communities, there's like the sun, there's like the source of this. And how do we get to that? We get to that by having these kinds of discussions and conversations and really breaking down the barriers that are keeping us from being able to do what we need to do to make the world better for everyone.
Yes.
I think
I'm sorry, good.
I think part of the problem is that people don't yet understand that there are different people who are Jewish and there are different people who are Black. So everything, for instance, just before I just came back from Italy, which is probably my favorite country in the world. And my wife and daughter decided that I just needed to get out of here and they needed to get out of here. So we picked Italy, this place in Italy. But just before I went, we always fly Delta. And Delta had taken a whole bunch of people off the plane who were Jewish. And it took them off because when they got on the plane, they started sharing food. And Delta has very strict rules about doing that, about eating on the plane. And so it took them all off, and it said, if you will promise to abide by the rules, we'll let you back on. And all but 18 said, I will do that. So they took that 18 off, the flight took off, they tailed the 18 over for the next day. And they said the same thing to them the next day, if you abide by the rules, we'll let you on. And as soon as the 18 of them got on the plane, they started sharing food. So Delta took them off again. The rabbi decided that that was anti-Semitism. Now, that wasn't anti-Semitism. That was a bunch of idiots who would not listen to what the airline was saying was going to do with people. And I use that as an example of they're idiots in all races and creeds and colors. But if everything that's Jewish is anti-Semitism, and everything that happens to the Black people is racism, we're never going to get anywhere. They're idiots in all races. And I think the problem we have is that people haven't done that. You know, there are things that, you know, I don't like parts of Israel, but I'm okay with that because I know the parts I don't like. I don't say anything when people who are Jewish say they don't like Idi Amin. He's dead now, but
yeah,
when they don't like that. Well, that makes sense to me. That's not a person you like. So we classify everything as anti-something, and I think that's the problem. And I think we live in a world, we meaning anybody on this team, we live in a world where that doesn't happen. So the problem is, how do we explain that to others? How do I say point blank to the rabbi who said that was anti-Semitism to say, no, it wasn't, it was a bunch of idiots? And be happy, be satisfied with giving an explanation. And the problem is we're not.
I think
I think part of this has to do with what Yolanda said earlier, this identity politics. To say those people on the plane with Jews, to me, is already you're off. The other thing is Jews. Everything that I do is not. I am not. It's not. You didn't do it. Zuchman did it. So this tendency to stereotype peoples because a person of a certain faith, color, gender, non-conforming, whatever. It's very dangerous. The tendency to stereotype, talk about Jews, I think is something that we don't talk enough about and fight against. I remember many years ago, I was at a party up in Rockland County. I work in East Harlem, and most of the there were principals in the school district. Almost everyone was Puerto Rican. And I'm at the party, and it's like 1, 2 in the morning now. I think it was actually a New Year's party, and I knew everybody there. Now they were folks from East Harlem, but then there were a lot of Puerto Rican folks who lived up in Rockland. And at some point, as the party was going on, this woman says, "My God, you're Jewish!" And I'll tell you, I could have jumped out the window. I was so offended by that. Why there's this tendency for us to see a human being and then relate to them not as a person but as a Jew, an Asian American, a lesbian, whatever. I think is very dangerous, and of course that leads to what you said, Luvaghn. And as you say, these people were jerks. They were jerks. They weren't Jewish jerks. They were just jerks.
You have a Go ahead. Somebody going to say something?
Go on, Luvaghn.
What happened?
Go on. No, you're okay now. We just lost you for a second.
It leads to us putting in positions of authority people who think in terms of that. People who will abuse us. So, I have a friend that goes up to Martha's Vineyard. She's black. And so I said to her, "Where are you going on vacation?" She said, "I'm going to Martha's Vineyard." I said, "Oh." She said, "There's a section of Martha's Vineyard where everybody goes and they're black." I said, "Well, why would you go there? You can see black people anytime." So, but she is more comfortable being around black people who abuse her. She doesn't know that, who abuse her, than around people in general who will just treat her like another human being. And that's the habit we have to break. If we break that, we'll be fine. But I go to New Mexico. I don't think I've ever, that's true. I've seen 2 black people. I don't care. But the average person does, and that's the problem. So we put people in positions of authority that take advantage of that. You look at Mount Vernon, which is not too far from me. It's pretty much it's black and white, but everybody who runs it is black, and everybody who runs it puts money in their pocket and takes advantage of people. Why would you ever elect anybody like that? You elect people like that because you think about what a person is as opposed to what he does. I don't know.
We have a comment. Someone commented to lose. So someone said, if we don't recognize people's unique identities, then we can't recognize the experiences they have as they move through a world dominated by whiteness. Lou, do you have anything to say in response to that?
Yeah, certainly I agree that we should respect each of our each of us in terms of our cultural identity. But we are more than just that. That if you only see me, I am a human being. I am unique. Part of my being unique is my Jewishness, if you will, my cultural identity. But I hope you don't just see me as a Jew. I think that's horrific. So I agree. Certainly, I believe very much that the diversity of this world is wonderful and something to be cherished. But when we only see you as a identity person, put you in a box, I think that that's very dangerous.
Is it fair to say, though, with things that have been going on, that being Jews being considered white, this is a discussion that has come up in the last year, even our own community by other Jews of color, and that they have felt marginalized? Do you think white is equated to privilege in some sort of color, skin color? That is something that has been a predominant, if not still true, narrative that is completely based here in America, in our history, and also in other countries. So I'm asking, do you think that if you are referred as, white to other nationalities, do you think that they may be thinking, oh, it's easy for you to blend in, it's not easy for me?
Well,
you have a certain privilege.
I think the answer is absolutely yes. And really, that's why Jews became white. There's a book, How Jews Became White. When my grandparents first came here, they didn't think of themselves as white. They thought of themselves as Jewish. They spoke a different language. They couldn't understand, English. And a good part of the Jewish community was in the same situation. The Eastern European part, which is by far the largest. But as people will, they wanted the easiest way for self-advancement. And so they assimilated. And assimilation means they became white because, the melting pot of America, everybody has to melt to white. There was not at that time the concept of diversity, that we can remain different and still be equal to each other. And I want to continue with that thought. There's been a lot of programs started, and most of them are pretty good. Racial reconciliation, or teaching white people really what it means to be white, what they should be self-aware of, and most people are not. And I mentioned I just got back from Mississippi, and in Holly Springs, there's a program called Gracing the Table, where white and black people get together and theoretically talk about themselves and theoretically come together in the end. But what's missing there, and what's missing with a lot of these programs, I think, is actually two things. Number one, black people who participate double think a lot, thinking, what does this white person, want me to say? This is particularly in Mississippi. And so they will talk about how some of their best friends are white and so forth. But what's needed is for both sides, both black and white, just to blast out what they think, at the beginning of the process, not at the end. A black person in Mississippi would say, or should say, I'm talking about Holly Springs, my great-great-great-grandmother was owned, legally owned by your great-great-grandfather. And our families never have gotten over that. And you had a tremendous advantage over me when you were born, because you were born to the slave owners and I was born of the enslaved. Let's start from there. Now, where do we go? And the other, that's number one. And the other thing is, from the white point of view, whites don't say, I'm afraid of all of this because you're making me feel guilty. I couldn't help it if my great-great-grandfather, was a slave owner. So get off my back. And somebody has to, say to them, you don't have to feel guilty. You just have to understand where you're at. It's not your fault. It's systemic. This is why they call it systemic racism. And let's start the discussion there. But most of these sessions don't start at the beginning. They pretend that they're at the end. Oh, everybody here gets along well together, and like that. So that I just wanted to say that the beginning of coming together is saying how you feel right now, unvarnished, but then be willing to hear what the other side has to say, unvarnished. And that's how we come together. That's the beginning of coming together. And it's not automatic. It's not like we'll come together in one session and talk and everything will be fine. I think the real long-term answer of coming together is people working together on common goals. White people understanding that racism keeps them back, that the average white person is making a lot less than they could be if the floor for whatever it is they're doing in wages, was not lowered by the power structure using one side against the other and paying blacks a lot less than whites, and that keeps whites down. And it's more complicated than that because, we're now an information society, and the image that I just created is not exactly true today, but it is true today that racism keeps everybody down. And so we should not try to engender guilt among whites. We should try to explain to them how it is to their advantage to change society to a non-racist society. And if we do that, and this is going back to what I said, working together on common goals, working together for universal health care, for child care, for parental leave, for all the things really that most industrialized countries have, but we do not have it here because we're based on racism. Now, unfortunately, the answer in most Western industrialized countries is not that they overcame racism, is that they're homogeneous to begin with. But that's a different issue. I think that's the beginning of coming together, talking about common goals and common problems.
Thank you, Larry. We have about 7 minutes left. Luvaghn, I'd like to hear your point of view of anything that you have identified going through the civil rights movement to the present and in the Black community on how we can improve allyships or, supporting other communities.
Well, how far back do you want me to go, or do you want me to start now?
You can paraphrase historically and then bring it to present.
I think it's if we do two things and we do them well, we'll do just fine in the long run. And one is be honest. We're not honest about who we are, where we came from, and what we need to do to change that. And I don't mean with just each other. One of the things about the speeches that I do is that one of the things that I loved about the speeches that was that we talked to people from somewhere else. We didn't talk, and younger people. We explained about what had happened, but we also talked about what they could do. So I think the first thing we have to do is be honest with ourselves and then be honest with other people. I think we also have to recognize that we're living in a country where people don't see it to their advantage to join up. Now they did in the 60s because that was pretty straightforward. Everybody had to vote. Everybody should have the right to go eat where they wanted to, all that stuff. But nobody complained about the GI Bill when it came along and gave all the money to white people. Nobody complained about the loans that they give to the white farmers. They complain now because there's a few $1 billion that are going to the black farmers. So I think we need to be honest and not blame each other for what happens, but blame the system that is set up to make sure we don't talk to each other. We on this panel are talking about, joining up with Jewish people. Well, Lou and I get along just fine because Lou is just another human being. And it turns out that we pretty much came up, almost could change lives and would be the same. The problem is we don't talk about how this affects people, how racism affects people. We talk to other intellectuals. One of the closest people I talk to right now is down in Georgia, and he disagrees with almost everything I say. But he now modulates what he says because we've talked. Those are the people we need to talk to, not each other or not other intellectuals like us. Lou is saying something.
Oh,
Yeah, what are you saying, Lou?
I can't unmute myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Luvaghn, this brings up, Luvaghn and I are civil rights spokespeople for Facing History, which is an organization dedicated to ensuring that the Holocaust is remembered throughout our school system with our young people. And we spoke at a yeshiva, which was clearly a right-wing group. And Luvaghn was kicking me under the table when I started saying things I probably shouldn't have said. But Luvaghn said something very, very, I thought, really important. This is who we should be talking to, not to each other. And I remember when the questioning started out, one yeshiva professor asked me why I would have ever been a civil rights, why I as a Jew would do what I did, why I would be a freedom rider. And I thought it was, I thought Luvaghn was really on the money. And I thought it was we've spoken at 50, 100 places, 200 places, but I thought this was something I would always remember. In fact, every yeshiva we went to is a place I would remember because these were generally conservative folk. The young people were struggling with the world they were in and what we were saying. And we can't just talk to each other. As Larry and Luvaghn said, we've got to be honest, but we've got to be humble, and we've got to share, I guess, who we are and what we understand with others, not just those who think like us, but with all folk, because I think that there's the potential of coming together if we actually interact with each other is very, very powerful.
We have a little less than a minute, so I do want to, thank everyone really quickly, and each panelist answer. What are some key important, just one important thing that you would tell future abolitionists and activists to help move the legacy of the civil rights movement forward? We'll start with Larry. 30 seconds.
Organize in the community. See what the people want and go for it.
Lou, 30 seconds.
I can't I can't do it in 30 seconds. Luvaghn, take a minute.
Well, my thing is very simple. Take an action, even if it's the wrong action. People sit around and ask a lot of questions about what they can and can't do. And my thing is, it can be as simple as putting your arm around somebody, can be a revolutionary act. So don't look for leaders, don't look for anybody to do things. You do it, and if it's small, doesn't matter. But sitting on the bench doesn't work anymore.
Which is why the series is called I Pray with My Feet. So get out there, do the work, just be kind and loving, try to understand and listen to each other. And I want to thank you all again for joining us. Thank you again for Luvaghn joining us tonight, Lou and Larry and Yolanda, of course. I wanted to give a special thank you to the organizations that co-sponsored this, Scan Harbor, New York, SNCC, as well as the organization that supported us as a community partner, is Dee Sanae. A big thank you to the Union for Reform Judaism, Religious Action Center, Facing History, and the JOC Initiative. And if this is your first experience with us or you're a longtime supporter, welcome and thank you for coming. And I founded this organization with the goal to elevate Jewish voices, Jews of color, and educate the larger Jewish community about the diversity of the experiences in the intersection of the community. So if you enjoyed this, please visit our website at www.mosaicvisions.org and support our efforts and click on the donate button. So I wanted to thank you again. And this is not our last program. The next one is in October. Just we're skipping September. It's a busy month, high holidays for us. And I hope that you'll be in tune then. So thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Bye,
Stay
everyone.
well. Everybody.